So in this part of the session, I'm going to talk on the subject of what good metadata can deliver. The reason I want to talk about this is that I often get requests from various organizations asking for demos of things like knowledge management products. And there's a lot of chat at the moment around generative AI and what things like GPT and ChatGPT can deliver. And this is a very good time to talk about metadata because the success of both of these kinds of projects really depends on the presence of a very well-organized set of content underneath them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of metadata and content I'm talking about here, and we're going to dive into those two use cases of knowledge and AI. But first of all, a little primer on what metadata is and what we mean when we're using that term. So at a very basic level, you will have things like file metadata, which will be file name, date modified, author, file type. These are basically things that have existed since the dawn of time in most Office software. As firms have incorporated document management systems, what has happened is that there's been an extra layer of metadata that's been added to these files. And that extra layer of metadata is needed because there is an additional purpose here of actually managing documents. File metadata tells you things like which applications should open a file, but we need an extra set of metadata to achieve that extra purpose of who has the document checked out, who's working on it, what type of document should this be considered as, what is the client that it relates to, what comments should people know about when they're opening the document. Document management systems use metadata to enhance the file metadata that would already exist. And that's why you see these kinds of things in systems like iManage. So that's a quick primer on metadata. And we're going to talk about why this is so important today. And I've touched upon this at a very high level already, but let's dive into each of the two things I was talking about. So firstly, people are coming in saying that they used to share knowledge all the time when they were physically in the office through water cooler moments or people being in the same room. But what we're hearing a lot is that people are spending less time in the office now, and therefore the traditional ways through which they have shared and accessed knowledge have disappeared. And that's why people are really focused on knowledge right now. And a lot of firms have a lot of content in their document management systems that have that file metadata and that document management metadata sitting over it. And we often get the question, we've got all of this data, can we plug a knowledge management system into it to get loads of insights and maybe make up for these new ways of sharing knowledge that have kind of need to come into place now with hybrid working? So let's take a go at answering that question. And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a mock-up of what our knowledge management system might look like over a set of content that has file and document management metadata on it. So this is iManage Insights, and if we could just get beyond how it looks on the screen, let's just dive into a few things to note about this content. First of all, the kind of content it's bringing back is quite noisy. You're getting some early drafts here, some old documents. You're getting things that are uncertain, so maybe things that aren't safe to find for knowledge, and maybe things that are irrelevant as well. So I put in a search term and it's not bringing me back things that I would consider to be responsive to that search term. As a result, search terms tend to get more complex because people are having to take things away and use these exclusions from the search term to kind of make their search terms more relevant. And finally, we've got all that metadata from the DMS on the left here, but is it really that helpful? I mean, this metadata is really used for document management purposes, but is it really that helpful for knowledge management? There are some aspects, of course, that are helpful, like things like author, but at the heart of it are things like the library it's in, file type, really that helpful for knowledge management? I would question that. So we've looked at what happens when you put a knowledge management system over standard document management system metadata. But what we are advising organizations to do is to add a third level of metadata on this stuff by curating that information. And this is what we call contextual metadata. And in the same way that we had things like who the documents checked out to, who the client was, for the same reason that stuff was useful for document management, we need an extra set of metadata that is helpful for knowledge management. And this is really picking up the kind of things that people want to do with knowledge search journeys. So they might want to refine by practice area, for example. They might only be looking for certain types of knowledge. They might want to refine things by jurisdiction. And when they open a result, they might want to see kind of things to note about the document and extra context because they might not have actually seen the document before. So all of this kind of metadata is going to lead to a very different experience when it comes to plugging in a knowledge management system. So let's look at this little snippet here. So the results are pretty clean. We've got things really labeled and things are relevant because we're dealing with a subset of information aside from your document management system, and it's very well labeled. So people can very quickly see like what is relevant for their particular need. The search terms therefore become a lot more simple because there's no need to do those complex search terms where you're excluding certain words that are irrelevant. And the filters become really, really helpful because we are using a set of metadata specifically designed for knowledge purposes. So these are the three kind of metadata that you really need for a good knowledge management system. And to answer the question I posed before, can you simply plug in a knowledge management system to your DMS? Well, you can try, but you will get much, much better results if you have this extra layer of contextual metadata. So when I get people asking me for a demo of a knowledge management system, we can, of course, do that. But really, quite a lot of the success in these tools is going to be driven by how well the content that plugs into it is organized, and in particular, the level of contextual metadata that you have applied to it. So I said there were two reasons why metadata is important to talk about right now. The first was knowledge management, and the second is artificial intelligence. So let's talk about that right now. We have all seen those snippets of ChatGPT that are flying around social media and everywhere on the internet. And it's safe to say that organizations are getting very excited by the potential of large language models. However, everyone acknowledges that they aren't quite there yet. So people are sort of focusing on this question, like, how can we use these tools and leverage them in a way that's going to deliver value? And in particular, people are kind of seeing some of the outputs of things like GPT, and they're sort of thinking, okay, some good sounding sentences are being produced here, like some good drafting is being produced. And isn't that what lawyers do? Don't lawyers draft things? And therefore, can't GPT replace lawyers? So let's just look at some of the pitfalls that you see in these kinds of systems right now. And we're going to talk about how metadata might or might not be able to resolve some of these pitfalls. So the first problem that you will see is that large language models can be mistaken. So in my example here, I've got what is the measure of damages in unjust enrichment. The large language model is looking at an incomprehensibly large set of training data here, and it's producing, an output maybe that doesn't quite tally exactly with a question that's been asked like this before. So rather than just admitting that it doesn't know, it just makes something up. Because these things at their heart of it are producing text. They are not really producing meaningful things. They're just spotting patterns between text. So you do end up with these mistakes or hallucinations occurring quite frequently. Secondly, the output of them can often be quite unhelpful. Things like if I'm asking it for drafting, it might not sort of care about where I'm coming from. It will give me some drafting that corresponds with its large training set, but it won't understand that what I'm really after is the most favorable position to my particular client. And sometimes that kind of context is lost with these models. And thirdly, what lawyers really need and what lawyers really depend on is authority. When they're going to court, they will cite cases. When they are negotiating, they will look at past deals. And when people are reviewing work products, they will often look to what happened the last time they did it and whether this might be a suitable place to pick up what was done before. And the problem is with these large language models is that the way they work is that the output necessarily lacks provenance, because the training set of them is so large, it's impossible to point to like the 1 or 2 documents that influence the output heavily. There's just no way that we can trace that through. And that can cause real problems for lawyers because so much of their work depends on authority and the ability to explain things to their clients. And if the output is being produced in a way where the output cannot be traced back to a particular source, these can create significant challenges for lawyers. So just bringing this back to metadata and content a little bit, we've got the large language models in AI that are trained on an incomprehensibly large scale. And that has some benefits because we can produce some very good looking outputs, but they're kind of unknown outputs because the training sets are so large. We don't know where it came from. And often we end up in these pitfalls like the mistakes and hallucinations. You could look at deploying these things on like a general document set, like your general document management system. And that is a large data set, nowhere near as large as those that are present in things like GPT. But as we've seen from the knowledge context, do we really want to be training on our general documents? Because we don't really know what's in there. These things are of varying quality. So we might run into the same difficulties we have with the existing training sets on GPT. So how about the contextual documents? This is a much smaller data set, but maybe we can think of ways to prioritize its use and maybe fine tune some of these models using a very well-organized set of documents of known quality. Maybe that is something that is going to be helpful. So we don't really know the answer to this yet. We're still very much in our R&D phase on this ourselves, but our working hypothesis is that you can combine some of these large language models with a great set of contextual documents that you already have a side benefit from in your knowledge management purposes. So at the moment, our recommendation is kind of watch this space, but we think that there may well be some benefits down the line from organizing your content well. And maybe this will make up for some of the mistaken and unprovenanced outputs that are produced by large language models right now. Maybe by introducing this additional well-organized, curated set of documents, we can get over some of those difficulties. So to kind of wrap up this section, metadata is important today because organizations are looking at new ways of sharing knowledge. They want to look at ways to ensure provenance and authority of materials and to allow lawyers to share and access knowledge in a trustful and consistent way. At the same time, firms are looking at the promise of AI and in particular, large language models. And at the moment, some of the exploration here is around text-based tasks and the importance of having this contextual metadata in your knowledge bases that you can use to enhance some of the large language models. So the takeaways here, you can improve knowledge sharing by curating and contextualizing documents. You can put a knowledge management system over a document management system, but no matter how good the tool is, the success of any kind of project like that will depend to a very large extent on the quality of the content that is fed into it and how well that content is organized. Large language models in the legal domain are likely to be much better if you curate and contextualize the documents. You kind of start in this place where the large language model has, a very large amount of data underpinning it, but you don't really know why its output is where the output is coming from or why it looks the way it does. So we think that by introducing some of this information, you might be able to add some benefits to this technology and really get the most value out of it. And then finally, the great thing is that all of these things come together very, very well. So you don't have to just be organizing and curating content for the purpose of making the most of generative AI tools. You can do this and plug a knowledge management system into it, and you will get immediate benefits. Even if AI doesn't have anything to do with this kind of space at all, even if we're wrong that quality of content can improve the results you get from large language models, you can have a simple retrieval-based way of accessing and sharing knowledge. So these things really do play together, and we recommend organizations kind of think of these two things as going hand in hand. You can deliver something a bit more quickly now with a knowledge management base, and you'll probably be able to realize some real benefits from that in the future using tools like large language models.